Over the many years of crop circling, a number of man-made creations have been done for a certain amount of commercial reasons. This one here at Woodborough Hill has been done for two specific reasons. It's basically been created for a published book which will be out very soon about the magic of numbers for children. But Simeon Hein is going to explain to us exactly about the far-reaching effects it might have for science itself. Simeon, we're actually in the commissioned crop circle for, I believe, Scott's Flansburg, who is actually doing a special book about the mystery of numbers for children, I believe.
That's right.
Now, we're quite interested in the effects which these actual formations actually cause. Can you explain to us what's actually happened, certainly in this particular circle?
Well, Stuart, let me just explain first why we made this particular formation. We made this for Scott Flansburg of humancalculator.com. He's in the Guinness Book of World Records as the world's fastest human calculator. He can add numbers in his head faster than any calculator. And the way he does it with is a base 9 number system. Apparently, this idea came to him while he was playing golf one day with Alice Cooper, and all of a sudden this idea came to him about number 9. And he realized if you used number 9 instead of 1 through 10, 0 through 9, you could do lots of things in your head without the need for a calculator. And as he said, he teaches this to kids in school. It's part of an educational project. He's a spokesman for Quest and Microsoft, actually, in elementary schools. Anyway, he commissioned us to make a formation based around his math matrix, which is based on a base 9 system. So we start with 0, 0 all the way up to 99 in the corner there of the formation. And I'm interested myself personally, apart from just helping him to do this, and to help with education in school systems for kids about math and being excited about science and so forth. What are the interesting anomalies that we've seen in man-made formations since we've been making them beginning in the year 2001? Because beginning with the original phenomena back in the 80s, people have been noticing very strange electromagnetic effects, balls of light, camera and battery failure around crop formations that in some cases the people had seen form in 15 to 20 seconds, the ones that Colin Andrews investigated back in the 80s. And we've been wondering if we reproduced it ourselves, you know, going in, paying the farmer, being allowed to use the field, could we reproduce some of those strange effects that we found in the original phenomena? And I'd have to say this is the first one we've done out of about 3 or 4 that we've done in Wiltshire and in the United States, where we've worked with the farmer. In some cases, they just let us go in and make this out of their own curiosity. But this is the first one we've really seen the strange effects on the cameras and batteries repeatedly. This particular camera, for example, while my colleague Ron Russell was photographing it from an ultralight right over the formation, it took 4 pictures fine. All of a sudden, the display started blinking, and it just froze. Even when I put it onto the review of the pictures, it wouldn't do. It was still blinking. It was like frozen up, like jammed. And this is something I've never seen in this camera. I've been using it for 7 years. I've never seen it, but over a crop circle, it begins to jam up. We had another group of people here yesterday, some women from the United States, Emily and Patricia, and they told me that their camcorder, while it started to malfunction in the East Kennet formation just a few miles from here, when they got to this one, it came just to this subsection right here, this little swirl, which has 2 swirls, and that could be important instead of the single swirl that we have in the rest of the circles here. There are 3 of these in this formation that have 2 swirls, 2 centers, so to speak. Their camera started acting up again, and within a few minutes it had overheated, and I came in just at that moment. I felt the camcorder. It was almost like a toaster. I mean, not hot enough to burn, but it was way too hot for a camcorder, those who have been around this for a while. Very warm, and the exposure system in the camera no longer works. We actually tested it, and it's broken. It's permanently broken. It's just going black to white, black to white. And so it seems that the crop circles burnt out the camcorder. And while it still works, it'll never function correctly again. So this is the sort of thing we've been seeing for years around crop formations, and now we know that indeed a man-made one. We know this is man-made because we made it. We were here when it was done. We took a couple months of planning, and we hired some circle makers who are very skilled at doing this to help us create some of the spirals, the beautiful patterns we see here. So the big question is, what is it about crop formations that does this? And I have some ideas about this. And we were able to incorporate some of those ideas into this formation just for that reason. There's a concept in material science called spiral modulation. It's basically when you take any crystalline substance and you twist it into a spiral shape, you get weird electrical anomalies and magnetic anomalies. And in fact, material science is a name for these. They call it metamaterials. Metamaterials are ordinary natural substances that when spun into a certain shape have exotic electromagnetic effects. And I'm convinced that when we take the standing stalks like this and we spin them into a spiral form like we see right here, two beautiful spiral shapes, that you've created a metamaterial that's going to have very strange effects on equipment because it's creating different sort of electromagnetic effects in the space around it. In other words, it's literally organized the energy of the area where the crop circle is. And so it doesn't matter if a ball of light creates a circle, a UFO, which has been seen many times, flying over the field, leaving a crop circle, or people come and do it. It seems to me and our group of researchers that once you have the spiral shape there, that you're creating weird electrical and magnetic effects. And there's three possibilities. I'll just explain to you very briefly why this could be happening. There's one idea that I've come across in science magazines, what could affect the batteries. There's something called Rydberg electrons or Rydberg electrons. They're when the electrons in different atomic structures, rather than being uncorrelated, begin to correlate as a group and form a ball. As they form a ball, they begin to slow down and they form a coherent group, as physicists call the bosonic electrons. They're not repelling each other like they usually do, they kind of cluster together. This comes about in photonic crystals. So if this has a crystalline effect, perhaps the way the light is reflecting off the lay crop versus the standing stalk is creating some sort of photonic effects. That's enough to affect the electrons and they can cluster into these groups. And in this science article actually said that they can affect flashlight batteries when they do this. It's a very rare condition, but perhaps crop circles are creating these sort of bosonic electron groups. Like you may have heard of the Bose-Einstein condensate, when you kind of get these electrons coming together and they form kind of one big particle. They kind of correlate together and they all work together like groups of soldiers rather than doing their own separate thing. Another possibility is that when you have crystalline lattices, there is something called a phonon. And this is when electrons from different spaces begin to correlate across a large space for an electron because of the spiral shape. The crystalline lattice, in other words, and this is kind of a crystalline lattice the way the farmer has planted the stalks very evenly, and now we've kind of created another lattice work here like a liquid crystal right here. The electrons can correlate across large spaces for electrons. They normally shouldn't do this. It's actually a type of superconductivity. And perhaps the crop circle shape is creating these so-called phonons where you get these correlations across the lattice work where normally the electrons would be doing their own thing, kind of moving in their own way, but perhaps they're being phononically connected because of the lattice work here. And another possibility beyond those two, which is again related, is the idea that the electrons, when they're in a kind of a shape like this, the materials when they're in a shape like this, actually create something that's called, it's kind of a antiparticle. It's quasi-particle. In other words, the electrons, when they're in a certain type of crystalline lattice, can also begin to flow more perfectly. Normally in a crystal, there's defects, and the electrons move, and they move more coherently than in a non-crystalline substance, but they're defects. But in some types of substances, like graphite out of a pencil, kind of the graphite in a pencil, if you structure that in a certain way, you lay it onto a paper, you can even do this with a pencil yourself. You put it in just the right way, there's no defects in the surface if it's layered properly, just like we find this type of layering in this particular formation. This is something that I didn't think people could do, by the way, perhaps 5 years ago. But now I've actually seen it done in this particular formation. This layering effect, very much again like the layering you see in certain types of liquid crystals. It's the same thing you see in these graphene structures, this graphite substance. There's about 10 varieties of graphite. It actually creates a flow of electrons. They can move so quickly and so easily that they create quasi-particles. Now, what's the magic about quasi-particles? When normal electrons come across a barrier, they kind of move back and they bounce off it. But quasi-particles go through the barrier. And this article from Science Magazine said that quasi-particles can short-circuit electronics. So here we have short-circuiting electronics. I think that's what's going on here. And it's possible, maybe, that this formation is creating this short circuit by generating quasi-particles. It's almost acting like a room temperature superconductor. This is something very much at the edge of science, if this is what's going on, because we know that superconductors can be created at very low temperatures, near 0 degrees Kelvin. But if it's true that these crop circles are generating some sort of exotic superconducting effect, that'd be a very important discovery for science, because it would mean that these shapes they're not just pretty pictures in the field. They're not just aesthetically pleasing. The reason we're so attracted to them is because intuitively we know there's some sort of important process going on here. And it's because of the spiral modulation of the crop. And the interesting thing, of course, would other shapes of the wheat recreate those effects? We need to do more types of circles to know that. But we know that this particular circle has affected a number of cameras. It's affected my own camera. And perhaps it's because it's literally changing the spin of the electrons and correlating them in ways that they normally wouldn't be in the standing stalk. And that would explain some of the weird effects that we're seeing here. And again, these articles mention flashlight batteries and electronics short-circuiting, and this isn't something you normally see electrons doing. But if they're jumping around between spaces, they're correlating, they're moving close to the speed of light, or acting like they're moving close to the speed of light because they're moving so smoothly. When you come into these formations, and this one in particular here, you can kind of feel something. You know, I was with someone the other day and she actually almost fell over in this section because of the feeling of it. It just has such a wonderful feeling. It's almost like a liquid moving around. It looks liquid. And the way it kind of bends around the spirals and these standing stalks here, it creates a feeling. Now, a skeptic might say, well, that's just a feeling you're having, but you know, it's just your feeling, it's subjective. But actually, I think there's something more going on there. I think the reason you're feeling that is because it's literally changing the energy in the space here. And it's conditioning the space. And that's one explanation of why we may be seeing these weird effects on our cameras. It may not be the only explanation, but it's certainly something that we can go with right now.
The whole experience at Woodborough raised an important question. This event, even though it's man-made, has created its own anomalies, raising further questions. So do we have a mystery within a mystery?